Hello and welcome to the Time for Marketing podcast, the podcast that brings you the best marketing conference speakers and allows them 5 minutes to sum up their presentation. My name is Peter and I'll be your host as I was in the previous 45 episodes, because this is the episode number 46. And if you want to talk to me, you can find me at SEOs.si. I'm an independent SEO consultant, just like my today's guest. I'm very glad to have here with me Barry Adams. Barry, hello and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for having me. Nice intro.
It was great seeing you in orbit. Was this your first time being in Slovenia?
No, actually, this is a fun story. My wife and I got married in Slovenia in Lake Bled in 2011, but it was the first time in Portorož. I hadn't been to the coast yet. I've only been to the mountains in Slovenia.
I was in Bled just 2 days ago, and me and my wife walked there and we were like, we wanted to get married here, but we forgot about that, right? Of course, we wanted to go to a different location that is not as touristy as Bled is, but it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's unbelievable. How did you find
it? Magical place. My wife had visited it many years ago, and when we discussed where we were going to get married, because she's from Northern Ireland, I'm from the Netherlands, and we wanted a neutral location. Everybody from wherever they were from had to travel. And so we sort of arrived at Lake Bled because it ticked all the boxes for us. We love history, and it has a beautiful 1,000-year-old castle. We love mountains. It's in the Julian Alps. And we love lakes and oceans. And there's the lake, of course, Lake Bled. And so when we started exploring that, we realized that it was actually quite easy to get married in Lake Bled because they have really good wedding organizing companies there who basically do all the trouble for you. So yeah, it was a very easy decision, and I'm really glad we did that because it was a magical day. And yeah, even now I regularly look back at my wedding photos. You know, we've been married 11 years now, and I still realize it was just a very special day.
Yeah, it's the word got out about Bled, and now everything goes there. Everyone goes there, and it's getting really crowded. So I think we're going to be like the Spaniards protesting against visitors in the next couple of years.
You need to do what they do with Venetia, in Venice, where they're now starting to introduce limits on how many people are allowed on the island. They need to do the same with Bled, like put gates around it and only let people in with special permits.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen because it's in the mountains, and because of that, it's even more fragile, the nature there. How was In Orbit, the conference?
Oh, fantastic conference. Beautiful location. The organizers were fantastic in getting everything sorted for us with the travel, the accommodation. The stages were really good, looked really good, really good attendation as well. I was, I felt very privileged to be presenting there.
Barry, people probably know you as one of the SEO guys out there, but I have to do that. You're an independent SEO consultant. Your company is called The Polemic Digital, and you've been doing SEO since 1998. I like to tell that I've been doing SEO for a while, but I was 17 at the time, so not there yet. What is there one thing that is the same and one thing that is very different in SEO since you started?
Yeah, when I started doing SEO, I didn't realize I was doing SEO. I built a few websites and realized they were not getting any traffic. And this is pre-Google days. Google barely started, or hadn't even started yet. So I was trying to get listed in the Yahoo directory and get listed in Alta Vista and things like that. The thing that hasn't really changed from then to now is you're still matching pages to what people search for. Matching search intent. Just that Google and other search engines have gotten a lot better at it now. But that part is still very true. You still have to, jump through the hoops. I think what has changed drastically for as long as I've been doing SEO is that there used to be a lot of shortcuts. You used to be able to almost, I wouldn't say cheat your way to the top of Google. You still had to earn it to a certain extent, but you could do things that weren't necessarily beneficial for the web as a whole. I used to buy links in bulk to get websites to rank high. And now I'm like, no, let's not even think about that anymore. It's just not worth the risks. And the chances are you're just going to be throwing your money away because those links are either worthless and Google discounts them
Mm.
entirely, or you're going to get penalized off the back of it and you're going to lose your traffic. So you now have to actually do things the proper way, which is actually more fun if you ask me. It's a lot more fun because you end up making better websites and better content, and what's wrong with that?
I just checked it out. I have a Reddit account that is 16 years old, and I remember why I signed up for Reddit, because it was one of the places where you were able to get backlinks easily, and that was a year after Reddit actually started. I, of course, then 10 years later figured out how it became the biggest the website in the US. It's one of the top 5 websites. Yeah, so these are the changes that have happened. You are now focusing in part on news publishers. How is that? You're organizing a conference for news publishers and SEO. How come?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because when I first moved to Northern Ireland to move in with what was then my girlfriend and is now my wife, one of the first jobs I had here was in-house SEO at the Belfast Telegraph, the local newspaper. And I thought I knew quite a lot about SEO already, because by that stage I've been doing it for 12 years, I think. And I very quickly realized that for news publishers, SEO was a very different animal. Classic SEO is about long-term activities taking many weeks, many months to build authority, to build content, and build rankings. With news, it's almost real time. You publish an article, and you get one chance to rank in Google's news ecosystem with that article, which is, primarily top stories boxes and news boxes on regular search results. Nowadays, you also have the Discover feed, which gives you a bit more time. But those top stories boxes have a shelf life of about 48 hours for an article. So you get one chance with an article to rank in those top stories boxes, and then you disappear. And if you're lucky, the article might surface again in evergreen content, if it's an evergreen article. But most news articles have a window of about maximum 2 days where they get most of their Google traffic, which means you have to do things very differently. You have to make sure you maximize those initial opportunities, you get your optimization right at the start, because if you go in later and try to fix it, you've lost the opportunity already. So when I started my own business in 2014 as my own independent consultant, I wasn't initially focused just on news publishers. I took on all the clients I could get, really. But I started to realize that news websites were massively underserviced. There were not a lot of consultants and agencies out there who have the experience in news and who know why news is different for SEO and what they need to do differently for news publishers versus regular websites. So I started to specialize in that. I was lucky. I had a few really good projects as well with some big UK news publishers that helped cement my reputation a little bit. So I started doing more and more with news publishers. And I also realized, because I speak at a lot of conferences, as you know, that most conferences for SEO are almost useless for news publishers, because they don't learn anything that is directly applicable to news websites. It's all general SEO and e-commerce SEO, and not a lot of content at those conferences that is interesting for news publishers and the specific challenges that they have. So John Shahata, who works at Condé Nast, he and I have been friends for many years, and have been talking for many years about news SEO and specific issues for news publishers. And he came up with the idea of, why don't we organize a conference, Barry? And I said, yeah, why don't we do that? A conference specifically on SEO for news publishers. So we had the first edition last year, where we sort of set a goal of maybe selling 100 tickets. It was an online-only conference because it was still in COVID times. We thought, right, if we sell 100 tickets and we put on a good event, we'll have done a good job, because we just wanted to create something that he and I would want to attend ourselves. And we ended up selling over 700 tickets. So we thought, right, we're onto something here. This is actually probably worth doing. So now we're doing the 2022 edition. It's slightly bigger, more speakers. Again, we got really lucky, like with the first year, where almost everybody who we asked to speak immediately said yes. Which is why the first year we had speakers from the New York Times, the Atlantic, Mashable, really big name speakers. And this year again, everybody who was on our wish list to speak, they immediately said yes. So we have a really good roster of speakers again. And it's specifically about all things SEO for news publishers, and all the things that news publishers should know how to optimize their articles, optimize their websites, and increasingly we're also looking at other audience growth things and how to monetize their articles. We're talking about paywalls this year as well. We have a great keynote from Joost de Valk from Joost, the WordPress plugin. He's a legend in the industry, and we're really lucky to have him as our
He
keynote
was
speaker.
on the podcast a couple of days ago, episodes ago.
He's a really good guy as well, and I know him. So I was really excited about this one as well. And we're probably going to keep doing this. We're probably going to keep it online as well, because we had people from 56 countries attend the first one. And we think that the appeal is that anybody can log in from anywhere in the world. You don't have to travel and fly and go to an actual physical location, which, let's be honest, is fairly expensive and also increasingly, I have to admit, not good for the environment. And we need to try and minimize that a bit. So we're probably going to keep it an online conference and make it as accessible as we can, not trying to charge too much money, but we still need to charge some money because it costs quite a lot actually.
Of course. Yep.
To host a conference. The online tools are quite expensive. So I'm really excited about it. This is year 2, and I hope we'll get to do this for another 20 years at least.
Where can people find it? We'll add that into the show notes. But
yeah, it's all on the website, which is newsseo.io. That is the website, newsseo.io.
It's
called
easy
the
to remember.
News and Editorial SEO Summit, NESS, and the website is on newsseo.io.
All right. Your presentation on In Orbit, the thing that we want to talk about was key technical SEO trends for 2022 and beyond. Barry, here are your 5 minutes.
Yes, technical SEO is sort of my thing. I come from an IT background, which is why the technical side of SEO is something I've naturally always enjoyed doing. In 2022 and beyond, I think the issues that most people need to be aware of when it comes to technical SEO relate to optimizing for crawling and optimizing for indexing. We talk about optimizing for crawling. To be fair, most websites probably don't have to worry too much about that. It's more if you have a really big website, 1 million plus URLs, you will probably need to do some things to maximize your crawl budget. And keep in mind that your best mechanism is robots.txt disallow rules, because that actually prevents Google from crawling. Whereas things like canonical tags and no index meta tags, they help manage your index, but they don't prevent crawling, because Google still needs to crawl those pages to see the no index tag or to see the canonical tag before it can then act on that. So it doesn't necessarily preserve crawl budget. And optimizing for crawling also means serving the right HTTP status codes. So 200 OK for valid pages, 404 or 410 for not found pages, 301, 302 redirects, etc., so that the HTTP response matches what you want Google to do with that particular URL. Then the next part is indexing. An increasingly important part of indexing is rendering, where Google renders web pages in a headless browser so that it can load all the resources, execute all the JavaScript, and get a good impression of the quality and layout of the web page. Things you need to worry about there is make sure your JavaScript is error-free and doesn't interfere with your meta tags too much. This is one of those things where I'm actually a fan of optimizing the order of your head section, especially in HTML, where your important meta tags like your title, your meta description, your open graph tags, your news article or other structured data, product structured data, sits high in the head section, and then any scripts sit low in the head, just above the opening body tag or the closing head tag, because I have seen quite a few examples where when JavaScript is rendered and executed, it inserts invalid HTML in the web page, which makes Google think the head section has ended and the body has begun. And if then there's any meta tags in what Google thinks is the body section, like your title or canonical tags or hreflang tags, Google just ignores them because they don't belong in the body. So you have to optimize your HTML a little bit and make sure your JavaScript loads quite late in your HTML code so that it doesn't interfere with the head section. Another part I'm really excited about in technical SEO is SEO on the edge, which is when we have a CDN like Cloudflare that we use to make our websites globally accessible and fast to load. It also means that we can manipulate web pages on Cloudflare, on those nodes all around the world, without having to change web pages in our own CMS. So we're basically optimizing websites on the edge without actually changing the code on our own web servers. And that allows for all kinds of interesting things like A/B split testing, where we can say, right, we have one category of products that we are going to do something slightly different with, and we're going to leave all the other categories the same, so that we have a bit of a baseline of comparison of what's working, what's not working. And you see a lot of interesting case studies emerging where people do A/B split testing. Search Pilot is a great tool that helps you with that, and they have a newsletter where they regularly publish case studies on what they find works and doesn't work with SEO on the edge. So I'm really excited about that as the future of technical SEO. And I concluded my talk with talking about accelerated mobile pages, AMP, primarily because AMP is dying, and I am very, very happy to see the death of AMP, because I am not a fan. If you type in "fuck Google AMP" in Google, pardon my language, my article tends to rank number 1 for that particular search. I'm very proud of that accomplishment. So yeah, I think 2022 is the year that we can finally say AMP is starting to really die out, and you see more and more news publishers abandon AMP as a standard entirely because it takes up too much resources, and it's basically an entirely parallel development track that they don't want to maintain. So now instead we can focus that effort on just improving core web vitals and not have to worry about having a separate code base for mobile users. So yeah, that in a nutshell was my talk at InOrbit this year.
All right, excellent. When we talk about the number or the percentage of the pages that should be crawled, the numbers can be checked in Google Search Console. It's never 100%. When or how much should it be there so that we can say, all right, we are good, and when or what the number should be when we should be concerned?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Peter. I think it depends on the size of the website as well. If you have 100 pages and only 90 of those are indexed, you probably want to work to get the last 10 indexed as well. If you have 1 million pages and 900,000 are indexed, I'm like, yeah, probably good enough. So it depends which pages. If there's critical pages that actually have value and you want to make money off of, you probably want to work harder to get those indexed. The thing is, and I feel really strongly about this, Google does not have an obligation to index every single page on your website. Google only cares about presenting the best possible search results to its users so that its users keep coming back to Google and Google can keep showing ads. And if they only need one web page on your website to do that, then that's enough for Google, no matter how many pages you actually have. Google wants to offer a complete reflection of the web because they feel, users are deserving of getting a broad spectrum of different content options. But they don't need to index every single page on your website for that. They just need to get a good sample of pages on your website. So for most websites, if you have an index level of 90% or better, you're probably already on the right track. Like I said, it depends on the context, on what type of pages. But if you have less than 90% of your pages indexed, you probably want to see about improving that, and also see maybe why Google isn't indexing those pages. Are they actually worth indexing, or are they just different lists of the same products or the same articles, in which case there's no added value for Google there. You have to make sure that most of the pages Google has indexed have value for Google's users, which is the World Wide Web, all the people who use the World Wide Web. And that there is value for Google in having those pages in its index. And if they're just filler pages or navigation pages that have no ranking potential on their own and have no value for end users, then yeah, of course, Google shouldn't be indexing those, and you shouldn't try to make Google index those either.
It's the Search Console is sort of crappy to analyze which pages are indexed or crawled. Is Screaming Frog with the API the best? I'm using Screaming Frog and the API to make it easier. What are your tools that you think people should be using?
Yeah, I'm a fan of Screaming Frog, especially with the Search Console API. You can do those bulk checks to see whether or not pages are actually indexed. I also use Sitebulb a lot. They have an upcoming server edition, which makes crawling very large websites very easy because you just run it on a separate server and let it do its thing, which also has really good Search Console integration. You can use a cloud crawler like DeepCrawl or Botify, which also have good Search Console integration. But yeah, the standard reports in Search Console, like you said, they're not that complete, and they're very much based on a sampling of data, which is necessary to a certain extent because of the speed with which they serve up those reports. If they wanted to have a more complete data set, it would be a very slow tool to use. So I'm sort of okay with that. And also that's why we have the API, so that we can build our own tools to do the more granular checking that we want to do. The only thing that I am a little bit annoyed about to a certain extent, maybe I'm asking too much. I realize it's a very big demand, but the 5,000 UL daily limit in Search Console in the API, like for large websites, that you don't even begin to have enough resources with that. So that's the only thing I think we probably need to convince Google to change, to give us bigger limits. But at the same time, I'm realizing we're asking them to make a free tool even better.
Right,
So,
right.
beggars can't be choosers, as we say here in the UK. It's already really good that we have Search Console, and it's a really good tool with a lot of really useful data in there. So, we can't complain too much, can we?
One more question on your expertise with news sites. Paywalls and the schema for paywalls. How important is that for websites? It seems that the biggest publishers are using the proper schema for paywalls, but everyone else or a lot of other pages don't use it, but Google is still seeing the content.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think you should always implement the schema paywall if you have a paywall, because it means Google doesn't have to do any guessing, and there's no mismatch between what Google sees and what users see. Because that's a big risk when you have a paywall and you don't tell Google there's a paywall and you let Google crawl your content normally, but for end users you suddenly throw up a registration box or a login box. That's a mismatch. That's not good, and that can hurt you in the long run. That's almost a form of cloaking to a certain extent. Whereas if you have the paywall schema, Google knows there's a paywall, and you can still let Google crawl all your content. But with the paywall schema, you tell Google this content is not actually free content. People will have to log in or register. And generally speaking, what I've seen in most cases, if you have proper paywall schema and you let Google crawl the website, you tend not to be penalized in rankings. You tend to keep your rankings in top stories and Google News, because Google doesn't want to be seen as stealing your income. They give paywall websites pretty good positioning compared to non-paywall websites, especially if you have a freemium model where you say give people 3 articles for free or 10 articles for free per day, and then the paywall kicks in, which I think is a really good system because it lets people sample your content before you make them sign up to something. I quite like that as a model, and I think most successful paywalls have a variation of that freemium model where you get a few articles daily for free, so okay, this is the type of journalism I'm going to be reading, and then you can decide whether or not you want to sign up for that. But yeah, it's always important to tell Google explicitly what kind of user experience you're offering, and if you don't tell Google that you have a paywall, you're sort of misleading Google, and that seems a very risky tactic.
It's going to go wrong eventually. All right. Barry, if people would like to talk to you or see you at conferences, what are your next shows and where can people contact you the best?
I don't actually have a conference planned for the next while, except for the News and Editorial SEO Summit in October this year, which is quite nice to spend a few months at home and actually getting work done, because that's still my bread and butter. I'm very easily contactable on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Badams, B Adams, one word. You can also add me on LinkedIn. I check my LinkedIn messages once or twice a week, so it's probably not as effective as Twitter, which I check every day. I'm a little bit addicted, I'm sorry. Or just email me, barry@polemicdigital.com. I try to be very generous with my time and my knowledge, and I have what I call an open email policy where anybody can always ask me a question via email about anything SEO related, and I'll do my best to answer. Although I might not give you an immediate answer, but I will definitely give you an answer at some stage.
All right. Excellent. Barry, thank you very much for being on the podcast and sharing with us all the things that are important, or the most important things in technical SEO. Have a great day and week up there. Please don't be too hot and don't melt in the upcoming heat wave. And have a great day.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.